soon introduce. Thank you very much. Good. So waiting for your answers to come through. And how many of you were at the conference? It would be also good to know that. Did you come for the conference? Just let us know that too. Thank you very much. I've already introduced myself verbally. Good to see you, Dr. Florence. Looking forward to the webinar. What's the weather where you are, and what L&D role do you play? Thank you. And which organization as well. Thank you. Marisa, good to see you dialing in from sunny Pretoria in South Africa. You should send some of that sun our way. Yes, you definitely attended the conference and also spoke. So great to see you. Wonderful. Great. Who else? More of us are joining. Good to see all of you joining. So what we're doing is sharing in chat our organization and the L&D role that we play and the weather where we are. Here in Kenya, it's in Nairobi rather, it's been a cloudy day as well. And I am a facilitator, also an instructional designer in the L&D space. Let's have a few more responses coming through, and then we shall put our speaker on. His name is Jonathan Ikeolumba, and he's sharing with us on the role of L&D in supporting the AU Agenda 2063. Very exciting times for Africa. Wonderful. So we have Alfred Okanzi. I hope I'm pronouncing your name well. Sunny Ghana, 24/7. HR Digital Communications is your organization. Then we have Izzy Owens, Ogo Fidelia, CEO Flourishing Fields, Agribusiness and Global Consult, joining from Delta State, Nigeria. It's hot there. Yes, I was waiting for that. You're also a BDSP. What's PIND or PIND? Let us know, Fidelia, but great to see you. Florence from Nairobi, the weather is good. You attended, yes, you definitely attended the conference on both days. George Abraham, connecting from the UK, in the Global Engagement Director of CU, sorry, it's scrolling up. Let me try and get that open. So joining from CUK TVET Alliance. Great to see you, George, and thank you for sharing your LinkedIn link. And Marisa Sani, Pretoria, South Africa. Yes, thank you, I'd read that. Good to see you, Ketsiwe, at Eswatini. Cloudy day, freelancing as an instructional designer and facilitator, and also a founder of your own platform, K-Trust Trading. You attended virtually, and you are also a speaker for sure. You were. Awesome. So those are the ones that we have. We'll give it about a few seconds to see. So we have Samuel joining, L&D officer at HPW Fresh and Dry Limited, joining from Ghana. I hope you're in Accra. If you're in Accra, I guess it's hot where you are. Let us know, Samuel. But great to have you all join. And I'm sure by the time we are done with this webinar series, we shall know each other quite well, because we'll have those of us who've been attending right from the beginning as well. So ladies and gentlemen, gives me great pleasure to introduce Jonathan Obina Ikeolumba from Nigeria. He's a certified chartered accountant and a freelance consultant with vast experience working across several organizations with different business structures and operating models. He is very passionate about solving complex business problems and helping businesses build internal capabilities. His core areas of specialization is business transformation, financial management, and sustainability, gathered from experience across roles in banking, private sector, development, finance, consulting, and academia. So we have with us wide experience, and he's been involved in collaborations with notable leading local and international brands like GT Bank, Access Bank, Stanbic, so quite a number of banks, Zenith Bank, the Institute of Chartered Accountants in Nigeria, and the Association of Certified Accountants as well. And he has also worked with many other banks, Development Bank of Nigeria, and also interesting, that's one thing we have in common, the Sherry Blair Foundation for Women, and Fate Foundation, among others, including the Tony Elumelu Foundation, Oxfam International, and many, many others. He's a seasoned finance consultant, and he has extensive experience in guiding clients through implementation of the latest and most groundbreaking financial reporting standards. He's a regular commentator as well on local and international media with an interest in topics such as finance, climate change, sustainability, and having featured across several radio stations. And most recently, he was featured as a speaker at the World Circular Economy Forum that was held in Kigali 2 years ago. And last year, he was featured as a speaker in a roundtable on the future of sustainability and circular economy in New Delhi, India. He is a doctoral researcher at the Lagos Business School and also a member of the faculty at the, is it Fate School or the Fate School of Fate Foundation, I guess, and a member of the faculty at the Lagos Business School Sustainability Center and Enterprise Development Center, which we are friends with, both of the Pan-Atlantic University of Lagos. He's also a master trainer with the International Finance Corporation and is widely known for his efforts in showing the intersection between finance and the sustainability. He's also a senior research fellow of the Fate, I guess, Institute, which is a platform that has allowed him to contribute to policy influencing within the entrepreneurial ecosystem in Nigeria. He has published his research papers as well across several local and international journals. He's the managing partner of Office Lord Consulting, which is a boutique finance and strategy consulting firm that is headquartered in Lagos, in Nigeria. And he sits on 2 boards, which are focused on different sectors of the economy. And he has supported over 1,000 business firms to improve their productivity and performance in his work. So today he comes to talk to us about Africa. As you well know, the Africa Union has Agenda 2063. And true to our conversation regarding learning and development, how does learning and development actually fit into Agenda 2063? So it gives me great pleasure, ladies and gentlemen, to have Jonathan Ikeolumba take the floor and just take us through his studies and what he has found and his thoughts about how L&D fits into Agenda 2063 of the African Union. Over to you, Jonathan. Thank you.
All right.
And as his slides go up, I'm just asking everyone, feel free completely to share your questions and your comments in chat, as well as your reaction as Jonathan takes us through his presentation. Jonathan.
All right. First of all, thank you so much for that very kind introduction. And I just wanted a confirmation if you can hear me. That would be helpful.
Yes, we hear you perfectly. Thank you.
Okay, very cool. So thank you once again, Caroline, and very nice and warm and kind introduction. Okay, so it gives me pleasure to speak to something I'm passionate about and also something that is an outcome from a recent research paper that I wrote, just looking at the progress with the African Union Agenda 2063. Just some perspectives. So I have a strong bias for sustainability, and my research work really is around sustainability, also intersecting that with my background in finance. But I did sort of discover from a lot of research that I've been undertaking that if Africa is really going to address a lot of its sustainable development efforts, it has to be linked with some of its strategic frameworks and strategic sort of plans. And one of that is very central, if you even ask me, I think the most audacious of all of them is the AU Agenda 2063. Also, as I was planning for the conference we had recently, I sort of looked at it to say, okay, it would be nice because that AU Agenda 2063 is a bold strategic framework to sort of speak to the learning and development ecosystem to say, look, we have a critical role to play in realizing this AU Agenda 2063. And so that actually informs the research that I'll be sharing today. So on that note, I'm very happy to just share what my research findings are. I think I've been warmly introduced, so I can't thank Caroline enough for that very kind introduction. So I'll structure my presentation according to my research format. So I'll share my thoughts on the overview of what I'm trying to do, introduce us to the concept around why learning and development has a role to play in the AU Agenda 2063, and also review a bit about what is out there and what does the literature speak to that, and then speak a bit about the methodology around this. What are the findings, then what are the conclusions coming out of this? But before I get into that, I just wanted to get a sense of our thoughts, right? And just feel the pulse of everyone. So let's just run a poll, and don't worry, it's just going to be a chat poll. Um, I've got here a couple of challenges that I think affects the work we do in learning and development, right? So I wanted to know which one we did think wasn't a part of them. So my question is, which of the following is not a key challenge that faces learning and development in Africa? Just put it on the chat. I just want to get a sense of your thoughts or feel your pulse, if I'll use that term. So one, limited resources; two, infrastructure gaps; three, political instability; four, abundant natural resource. So which of them is not a challenge or is not a key challenge? So all of them are challenges except one that you think is not a key challenge. And I just wanted to get that. So one, if you think is limited resource is not a key challenge facing L&D. Two, if you think infrastructure gap is not a key challenge. Three, political instability. And then four is abundant natural resources. So let me see what you are typing on the chat. I think I've gotten just Celestine speak. So Celestine is saying abundant natural resources. It's not a challenge at all. We are blessed with that. Marisa says that as well. Ekaite feels political instability is not a challenge facing L&D. Fidelia says abundant natural resource. Alfred also says abundant natural resource. So I think I've got responses from about 25% of the call. Let me hear what others say. So George says the challenges are actually around 2 and 3. So indirectly, George is saying 1 and 4, but I just want you to pick one, George. But thanks for sharing that. Samuel says abundant natural resource. So I think we're doing about 7-8% higher than what we had. So maybe 2 more response, then we are fine. Nancy also thinks it's abundant natural resource. Okay, 1 more response. I think we would have gotten to 40% of the respondents on the call. Given we're 25, I've got 9 people. So if I get 1 more, then that is 40%. Great. Eldora says abundant natural resource. All right. Okay, cool. And that was just supposed to help me understand our thoughts as to what we did think could be the challenges facing L&D and what we do have in Africa that we sort of could harness. And that was really what I was trying to do. Just to say, what can we harness, really, if we think about the work we could do with L&D in Africa. And I coined it in that way, which is not a key challenge. So I think intuitively, my thoughts sort of reflected in the majority of the responses that we got. Okay. So that's just one. Again, I also want to deepen this conversation today. I want to ensure that it's very interactive. So I've got another poll, and this will be the last one, just to get to understand some things a bit more that would explain the way I'll go about this presentation. So what do you think are the most significant barriers to implementing L&D in Africa? Is that going to come up? I think no. Okay. Let's keep that. I'll bring this back. Right. Okay, thanks for your thoughts. So for this work I want to share today, I'll be speaking a lot from the perspective of the strategic framework that the Africa Union has put forward. And I really encourage everyone to look out for that document. It's a very audacious document. This was put forward in 2013, and the idea around 2063 was it's a 50-year roadmap. So if you wanted to get a sense of what Africa could look like, right, over a 50-year plan, that was a document that was put forward about 11 years ago. So we are circa 11 years into that document implementation. We've got another 39 years, around another 4 decades to go. So very ambitious document. And so what I wanted to understand was how can learning and development, right, support that realization of that agenda? And that's what I'll be sharing with us. So a bit more about that is that document, like I said, is a comprehensive framework. And I think it's the most ambitious document I've sort of witnessed, to be honest, right? And many of the initiatives coming out of Africa is flowing from that document. So things like our Africa Free Continental Trade Agreement is actually an offshoot as well, too, from this audacious document. I also kind of look at it as a blueprint, stating what Africa wants to do, like I said, over the next 4 decades, because we are a decade already into it. But the interesting thing around that document is that it ties neatly together with the Sustainable Development Goals aspirations. So, for example, at the heart of that document or that strategic plan is the idea that Africa can be a peaceful continent and one that will be prosperous, right? So the broad vision around that strategic plan is to have an Africa that is united, an Africa where we sort of look at our diversity as our strength, an Africa where we would take our rightful place, right, within the global arena, and one that would really live up to its billing as perhaps the continent with the most potentials to stimulate global progress and global economy, right? So what were the goals, the broad themes and goals around that objective? Like I did say, an integrated Africa. And I would speak to what the pillars of that document was speaking to. So in that document, they wanted to look at how we could unite politically, how our economies could be integrated, and how we can harmonize our various culture across the north, west, east, and south of Africa. Also, too, was to have a prosperous Africa, especially one where we see industrialization leading our surge and our growth, right? And obviously peace, which will also speak to stability and conflict resolution. So that document could be further shrinked into 7 pillars. So it is anchored on 7 core pillars. And I'll speak to that, right? So the first one, like I said, the prosperous Africa, inclusive growth. And at the heart of this particular one, so think of this as pillar 1. At the heart of this particular one is learning and development. So there's actually a direct linkage with what we do in L&D and also in the pillars that will drive the AU's 50-year strategic plan called the AU Agenda 2063 sort of idea, right? So there's a direct rule which just fits into pillar 1, right? But also other things or the other pillars also can also harness or leverage from the work we do in L&D. So for example, politically uniting Africa has a lot to do with institutes and organizations that will be promoting best practices and the ideal of what we'll call an African Renaissance, right? Also to an Africa where there'll be good governance, democracy, respect for human rights, justice, and rule of law. Again, this is also an area that can be anchored and driven by L&D. The idea of a peaceful and a secure Africa is the 4th pillar. Again, L&D can lead this. An Africa with strong cultural identity, common heritage, values, and ethics. That's the 5th pillar. Then an Africa where development is people-driven. Obviously, that's also a direct linkage with the work we do in L&D. And then above all is a united, resilient, and a global player or a global partner, right? That sort of continent that would drive that. So that's like the 7 pillars that sort of expresses the work around AU. Like I said, many of the big expressions of the work going on in Africa, you would find that it was all birthed from this document, which also includes the very popular Africa Continental Free Trade Arrangement. All right, cool. Now, let me then tie this. So a direct linkage with L&D and the Africa Union Agenda 2063 is in Pillar 1, the inclusive Africa where sustainable development will be prioritized. So that one clearly has L&D spelled out as one of the yardstick and one of the levers for achieving that Pillar 1, right? So what is it that we're seeing, right? So we see strides in L&D, especially from the perspective of the embracement of technology, and I'll speak to technology very soon. So I think what the research is telling us is that we're making significant strides. Africa obviously has been one that has been challenged with issues like poverty, unemployment, inequality, right? And sometimes we find that this is rooted in a lack of skilled labor. So in a way, the research tells us that some of Africa's biggest challenges, you could actually, sort of link it to lack of skill, lack of capacity building, right? Lack of an informed workforce and things like that, right? So just to show you what the research is telling us. Again, when we ask ourselves, what do we mean by L&D, or how can L&D sort of, lead this? So things like education, just ensuring that we are mainstreaming education, that every country in Africa is prioritizing education. We're aligning with UNESCO's best practice requirements on ensuring that at least our budgets, the national budgets, in terms of the education component of the national budget should be a minimum of 15%, right? So by encompassing things like education, embracing training, embracing skill and capacity building, L&D can be such a powerful tool for addressing some of the big challenges we have in Africa and as outlined in our AU Agenda 2063. So this is the charge that L&D is a fantastic way to think about how we can equip Africans with the knowledge, with the skills and the competence to be able to thrive in this rapidly changing global economy. And L&D can foster innovation, right? And that would also speak to productivity and then the creation of jobs in itself. But are we challenged in L&D? Yes, we are. And I did a poll to say, look, what were some of the things that were challenges and what wasn't? And I think the majority sort of spoke to that. So limited resources are part of the issues that we must sort of confront if we are going to harness the potentials that L&D does have for Africa. Many African countries, right? And this is going to be easy for you to tell with a simple search on a search engine portal. Many African countries are facing constraints in terms of being able to solve or address the potentials for L&D. And it comes down to things like funding, infrastructure. Very interestingly, it's qualified educators or qualified capacity builders, right? These are some of the issues we find. Also, infrastructure gap. Technology holds significant potentials, but again, technology would ride on basic infrastructure, which we still have a lot of cases around deficit around that. So things like inadequate access to electricity, right? It's a big issue, right? Internet penetration is still quite low. Also, when you think about infrastructures around transportation that can also help with implementation of some L&D initiatives, whether it's just facilitating people or just ensuring that people have access, to platforms and centers where they can get upskilled, right? We still find that these are big issues in Africa. Then obviously political instability has been one, right? And political instability really also from the perspective of lack of consistency in policies that we find, right? A very good one that will just come to mind really is how we view L&D or we view education as a function of our total budget across the country, right? How much we do in the continent around just devoting resources to upskilling our educational centers, right? A big part of our education across Africa is largely public driven. And even at that, we find that where there are policies inconsistencies, sometimes even political leadership instability, it also affects the efforts that goes on in capacity building, in skills development. And all of these are really some of the major issues that we find with learning and development really from an African perspective. So what we tried to do in the research was to say, okay, in what ways can we itemize an African themed sort of agenda to realize this 2063 objective. So sort of nuance it to us in Africa. What can we do, right, that can be a bit African centric? Right, that's the kind of thing we wanted to do. So, and to do this, we're looking at, you know, some of the L&D work that has been ongoing, some development indicators, so that we could come up with what we call like an evidence-based recommendations to help policymakers in the continent to be able to drive L&D initiatives, so that we can realize our AU 2063 objectives, so that we can support L&D professionals. Well, I think all of us here on this call have a critical role to play in that. So what is the argument in the paper, right? Is that, look, L&D really is a strategic way to realize our AU agenda, right? Whether it's the fact that it features prominently as a core pillar, or one of the core pillars, or the fact that it's even linked to the other 6 pillars as well too, right? So if we invest, and that's really what we're trying to do with this paper, to make a recommendation to policymakers, to political leaders, right, to L&D professionals, that we must invest in L&D if we would achieve this 50-year strategic plan for Africa. And this will ensure that we can become very economically competitive, we can reduce poverty and inequality, we can promote social cohesion and unity across the continent, deal with issues, you know, that affect us, you know, as a continent, and much more strengthen our governance and institutions in Africa. So to do a very good research, it's always helpful to know, okay, what has been the work that has been done so far, so that we can then identify what are the gaps we need to sort of close to take the work that has been done and take it forward. So for example, there's a very beautiful document that I would also encourage us to look at as well too, called the Continental Education Strategy from Africa, right? It's a 2015 document, obviously flowing from the work on the AU agenda's implementation. And that document sort of outlines strategies that the educational systems, the educational sectors within Africa can sort of embrace and harness if they will promote skills development, right? So one of the literatures that we relied on in building our work for informing this research was that document. And I encourage all of us here as L&D professionals, there are quite a lot of opportunities for us to play in at the level of African support for the AU 2063 agenda, obviously through the lens of education, and the broader picture is the L&D work that we carry out. Also, too, the Pan-African University has a paper that speaks to how offering specialized programs that are targeted towards our nuances in Africa, right, can help with regional integration and address the critical challenges that affect our development here in Africa, right? There's a very good paper that we came across written by a Greek professor, Sakharopoulos, that says, look, human capital, capacity building, learning and development is so central in enhancing productivity and innovation. And then the argument is, if Africa wants to be an innovative Africa, if Africa wants to be a productive Africa, it just makes sense that they invest in human capacity building, they invest in skills acquisition, they invest in training, and just developing the capacity of Africans to be well informed, right? Another research by Hanushek and Westman says, look, cognitive skills, right, and economic growth across nations have a direct relationship. There's a strong link. Again, the argument is, if nations will prosper, you can put it this way, if African nations will prosper, right, we've got to also develop their cognitive ability to identify problems, solve problems, and create innovative solutions. And that's a fundamental research that sort of shaped why we thought there's quite a lot of opportunity to look at how L&D can support that. Lomba-Tuse and Lovu, right, from Southern Africa, has a research paper where they looked at the importance of L&D in the 2063 aspirations, right? But one of the things I liked, and that's obviously where this sort of research we pick up from, was that, look, we should look at practical implementation strategy. So I think what that work sort of highlighted was, look, learning and development can drive the AU Agenda 2063, but how do we practicalize it in a way that sits or fits our nuances here for us in Africa, right? we did recognize that skills development, right, is an essential part of how we can look at how L&D can support economic growth. But we also have identified that even if we wanted to do a lot around skills development in Africa, there were still some unique challenges. I spoke about things like political instability, policies, inconsistency, inadequate funding, and things like that, right? Again, supported by quite a lot of research. Benavides and a couple of researchers has a 2017 paper that looked at the mismatch between education and labor, right? And says part of the reasons why many labor markets are not able to be as productive as they can is because they don't pay attention to the education pipeline that feeds people into the labor market. Cocklau has a paper as well too that says, look, skills and developments that will support development strategies of any entity or organization has to be one that is context specific. So in a way, it still speaks to the point that if Africa is going to leverage L&D to address the AU Agenda 2063, it has to also be context specific. So we've got to look at our issues, right? So it's a bit more like, what are those developmental issues, that we're grappling with in Africa, and simple things like even security is part of it, right? So we need to build skills capacity, right, to deal with those specific issues, right, that would limit us in Africa. So if access to finance is a major issue we have that affects the continent's prosperity, so skills around improving access to finance, if it is around security, skills around that, right? So that's really what this research was saying, that we should put forward context-specific skills. That is the way development strategies can be realized. And to make the case that if African economy would transition to one that would harness learning and development, one that will harness knowledge, one that will harness technology, it has to be context-specific skills that we should go for in Africa, right? Again, like I did say, that aspiration 1 or pillar 1, right, sits at the heart of how you can look at how L&D can support the AU 2063 agenda. Because, for example, if you look at the pillar 1, right, that speaks about an inclusive Africa, a prosperous Africa, how are we going to achieve a prosperous Africa, inclusive Africa, if we don't have skills around financial literacy, if we don't have skills around entrepreneurship and innovation, if we don't even have skill sets around technology that is going to be harnessed? So you can see that if we're going to directly achieve some of these broad pillars and broad aspirations, L&D programs, L&D initiatives, and that's where the opportunity for all of us does lie, right? So it's sort of saying that, look, over the next 4 decades, there's going to be big opportunities, right, that we're going to have, for entrepreneurship and innovation programs, for technology programs across the continent, for financial literacy programs across the continent. Doing the research and the literature review, we did see that many of the big nations in the world, the big businesses in the world, were actually committing capital as well to some of these areas in Africa and outside too. So, for example, Google has a $1 billion fund investment that they've put forward in Africa and developing programs around technology acquisition, technology skills acquisition, things around promoting entrepreneurship, right, through some of their programs, right, particularly focused on Africa, right? And you find that initiatives with other organizations, big tech firms like Microsoft, coming up with African-centric content that would also help them with things around skills acquisition. The Africa Development Bank also has put forward like a youth fund to just drive the promotion of learning and development programs for youths across Africa. And we're seeing a lot of this going on as well too, right? Again, I looked at the 4th pillar, aspiration 4, that speaks to a democratic and accountable Africa. And we've got to start thinking even about things like civic education, right? So programs like leadership development, these are opportunities for all of us as L&D, right? Because these are some of the things that would allow us achieve these issues around improving corporate governance, improving good governance, holding our leaders to account across Africa as well. World Bank has a research in 2013 that was looking at how education ties together with GDP per capita. And I think the research is that the higher you invest in education and training, the more you would find a surge in your GDP per capita as well too. Again, we're seeing that technological advancement is opening up potentials for L&D initiatives across Africa. A research by Hasler in 2018, supported again by another research by Aya 2019, looks at how e-learning platforms and technology platforms, mobile learning apps, virtual reality, and more recently, we're going to talk a bit about AI, right? It's expanding access to quality education and training for us here in Africa. So, a good research for us will be one that has a couple of theories, theoretical framework that speaks to and explains that. So, we looked at 3 theories to explain why this research is pointing in this direction. The first one is there's a theory called the human capital theory. The human capital theory says, look, if we invest in education and training, right, which is essentially human capital, we can enhance productivity, right, and earn better to create economic prosperity. So that's a theory that sort of explains why this research was important and motivates the kind of things we're looking for in this research. Another theory speaks to organizational learning that, look, the organizations that would effectively acquire skills and utilize the knowledge are the ones that will achieve competitive advantage, right? So whether we're now making a case to say African organizations, right, you could look at this lens to understand why investing in knowledge management, in knowledge acquisition, because it will help you achieve competitive advantage in the marketplace. Another theoretical underpinning is on the knowledge management theory. And the idea here is that, look, if we can identify, capture, disseminate knowledge within organizations, it will support decision making and innovation. All right. So, having established this research objectives we wanted to do, having also established what the literature we're saying and what is the opportunity to take the literature information forward, right, and the theories that we covered, we then asked ourselves through a cross analysis of several studies, what are the L&D initiatives we're seeing across Africa? I think the one that I like a lot is the fact that many countries in Africa have a national development plan. Again, feeding off the fact that, you know, the countries in Africa, the AU had signed this AU agenda into law. So many countries, and I think almost all countries in Africa, has a national development plan that is looking at how L&D and the education sector, in fairness, would drive their development growth and aspiration. Another one is public-private partnership is also another area where we are seeing L&D initiatives. So we're seeing collaborations between public institutions, private organizations, collaborations between the government, right, and also private sector, right, so that we can deliver and enhance some of the L&D programs across the continent. We're also seeing regional initiatives as well too, right? So at the regional blocks, and we have about 8 regional blocks across the length and breadth of Africa, we've seen quite a couple of initiatives from ECOWAS to CESA, and quite a couple of them COMASA. We've seen quite a lot of initiatives to promote education and skills development as well too, right? Interestingly, there's also a role for L&D in the Africa Free Continental Trade Agreement. One of the things we're seeing here is that if you look at the Africa Free Trade Continental Agreement, there's obviously the role for a youth-led Africa. There's also a role as well too for education. In fact, goods and services are really at the heart of the things that will be traded in the Africa Free Continental Trade Agreement that we can export to the world, right? So we're seeing quite a couple of things going on in terms of how AFCFTA is demanding new sort of competencies and skills, right? So we're seeing a lot around people and businesses that are trying to position themselves for movement and expansions across the length and breadth of Africa. Again, opening up L&D sort of potentials for businesses that want to help firms move across Africa, explore potentials across Africa, and then provide skills and close out skills gaps, right, that would limit the opportunities for firms to harness the potentials that we see in Africa, right? So we did a mixed method research where we were speaking to people, we're reviewing documents as well too, right? So that we could understand how can L&D support the 2063 AU agenda. We also looked at a lot of national development plans. I liked what we saw in the southern part of Africa. South Africa has a very good one. Kenya has a very good one. Rwanda has a very good one. Over here as well in Africa, we also looked at what we're doing in Nigeria here as well too, right? We also looked at data from World Bank as well too, to understand, is there a relationship between youth unemployment and some of the issues as outlined in the development of the AU Agenda 2063, right? So basically, it was quite mixed in what we're looking at. We did analyze a couple of data, like I said, from Nigeria to Kenya to South Africa to Ghana, to understand what were some specific aspirations that they had in terms of developing the education sector, developing the L&D effort there. So for example, we see that some of them have doing a lot of work around STEM, right? So West Africa, Nigeria has that, Ghana has that, right? A lot of work around STEM. STEM is an acronym for sciences, technology, engineering, and obviously management, right? So quite a lot of work they're doing at the level of the country in promoting STEM-based education, right? Education focused on that. And we're also seeing that quite a lot of countries are looking at developing leadership and embracing leadership as well too, right? And then entrepreneurship is one, because that ties into the first pillar or the first aspiration. And we also try to speak to stakeholders, right? Leaders in some of this STEM education initiatives, some of this leadership development programs and entrepreneurship program, sometimes even speak to government officials to just understand what is their thought process, what's their thinking around how L&D can support the Africa that we all dream about, right? As espoused in the AU 2063 agenda, right? And while we're doing this, we were trying to identify some thematic areas that were coming up, right? Or theme analysis or thematic analysis. So we're seeing things like, look, let's have vocational based training, right? Complementing the kind of trainings we have in the academic institution. Let's have skills development as something that would enshrine, right, at various levels in the educational sector. Let's also have technical education centers, right, for people who want technical skills. And obviously, something that was coming out in all these national development plans and L&D documents we looked at was also the role for developing the facilitators and the teachers. So teacher development program as well too. And these opportunities that we can also invest in as well too, right? So we did see that many of these national development plans recognize that L&D was critical, right? Many of them also saw that it could lead into broader things around the AU 2063 aspirations. And that's why many of these countries are now adopting education in STEM. Now we're also seeing a lot of things going on in the areas of art and the creative economy, the digital economy as well too, and obviously using that to drive entrepreneurship, right? Some others looked broadly at developing the general educational sector and improving literacy levels as well too. So from the preliminary analysis and what we did find, we could see that there's a positive correlation, right, between L&D, right, as contained, or the L&D investment as we could see, and the national development plans. And obviously, as we could also look at that in terms of improvement in human development index. So what we find is that the countries in Africa that are putting a lot of focus in developing their education sector, doing a lot around L&D, they're also seeing improvements in their GDPs and improvements in their HDI, right? Again, one of the things we also wanted to understand was the causality and if there were other factors beyond what we've identified by simple investing in L&D could have also been responsible. We like the work that is going on around STEM in Kenya and Nigeria. And we think that that is also responsible for improved student performance we're seeing, right? But although we would say that teaching resources across the rural parts of these countries and by extension across Africa can still be improved upon, right? That's also something that we also noted. Again, we're seeing that entrepreneurship training programs is empowering young people. I will use the case of Nigeria. There are quite a lot of entrepreneurship training programs coming up. And that is empowering people, young people, to solve problems, to create jobs, to create their own businesses, right? But as we've seen that, we're also finding out that still some challenges with the scaling the level of entrepreneurship training programs we're seeing. So access to finance is still something that is coming out, from the preliminary studies we're doing already as well too, right? So leadership development program, quite a lot is also happening in Kenya, right? And we're beginning to see a generation of new leaders, young leaders, that is coming up as well too. All right. So if we synthesize all of these things, right, I think what we would say is that there's a positive relation with investing in L&D through the national development plans that every African country sort of has a representative of, right? And we can see that as well, that by investing in L&D, right, we can see that we could make progress towards the AU 2063 agenda. So the point here is that L&D is crucial in achieving our development aspirations as a continent, right? Although we find that there are quite a lot of L&D initiatives, whether it's around leadership development, whether it's around entrepreneurship or technology, one of the things that we are also advocating for from the analysis we've done is that we need to have something a bit more targeted, right? Something a bit more nuanced to the diversity in the journeys we all are as a country and as a continent, right? Again, we're also finding out that infrastructure gaps, like we did mention, political instability, limited resource, still will remain an issue that could define how quickly L&D can support the AU Agenda 2063. So it's more like saying that if Africa is really going to harness the potential for learning and development to drive the AU Agenda 2063, Africa has to do a lot around leveraging, investing in resources, infrastructure, and also ensuring that there are policy stability and political stability as well too, right? And obviously, something that will make a successful L&D program, from what we are finding, is obviously things around funding, partnership, and then also the quality and contextualizing some of these programs in itself. So some major learnings we wanted to share from the research is that, look, L&D is a strategic investment. L&D ties into investments in capacity building and human capital development. So organizations, stakeholders must realize that investing in L&D, improving the work we do in L&D, is an investment, as opposed to looking at L&D as areas where some people feel we could cut costs, right? L&D should also be contextualized. We spoke about the fact that, look, in Africa, we have issues around areas like entrepreneurship that requires a lot of L&D effort. Areas like technology, skills acquisition, that requires a lot of L&D initiative, right? Areas like leadership. Corporate governance is also a big problem in Africa, right? So we also need L&D initiatives driving and addressing corporate governance issues. Partnerships would obviously be something that we want to continue to see. Partnerships is critical. Public and private partnerships between government, businesses, civil societies, right? Between the academia, between learning institutes, learning professionals like all of us on this call will be critical to leveraging L&D for the AU Agenda 2063. Technology will have a crucial role. And one of the interesting things about technology, the advances in technology. So AI obviously is a catalyst, to expanding access to L&D, also to mobilize the ways in which we can contextualize L&D to Africa. So technology and AI would improve the quality of learning, improve the quality of education and training, that Africa needs to be able to address and achieve this ambitious 50-year plan that it has in its AU Agenda 2063. Then obviously we must continuously evaluate, right, and review our learning programs, our learning curriculums, so that we can make adjustments where required. So those would inform our key recommendations. We want government to be active. We want governments, as they're currently doing in the national development plans, to allocate more resources, increase that, go ahead of the UNESCO's requirements for 15% of the budgets to education and L&D. If many governments across the continent will commit to increasing this will obviously be helpful as well too. We want to see a lot of partnerships as well to implement L&D programs. We want technology and AI addressing some of these issues, especially around quality of education and training, right? And then we would also have to look at like a medium-term assessment of the effort we have done so far. So we're 11 years into the 50-year journey to 2063. We're also advocating that we should have more longitudinal studies to look at the impact over more years as well too. So in conclusion, we sort of wanted to demonstrate that L&D can support the AU's Agenda 2063. We do think that the African nations, if they equip their workforce, if African nations would devote a lot of their budgets to learning and development, if they would also come up with programs where they can partner a bit more with the private sector, we do believe that, look, we can facilitate a situation where economic growth, innovation, sustainable development can become something that can happen at a faster pace in the continent, right? So at the heart of what we want to say in L&D is a concerted effort for partnership from government to business to private sector to learning and development professional to civil society. All right, so that is really what we have seen from our research. We are very happy to take feedbacks, comments on how to take the work forward. So at this point, I'm happy to take in questions and to just say a big thank you for giving us the opportunity to share our research. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you very much, Jonathan. That was really comprehensively done. Lots of information there. The one thing that's ringing in my mind is opportunity. There's lots of opportunity for L&D in terms of being the conduit to provide the education that is needed to upskill our people, and of course to then achieve the developmental goals that have been outlined in Agenda 2063. So some comments from chat. So Margaret says, wow, well done, blew me away, wow, from the Secretariat. It would be great to have some reactions and also to have comments from the audience. So if you have a comment, either share it in chat or just raise your hand and I'll be happy to give you the opportunity to speak verbally on the mic. Very, very useful information. Thank you. Anyone wants to share on the mic, just raise your hand and we shall give you the floor.
Where is is George Abraham here?
Yes, thank you, George.
Hi. I can't see where to raise my hand. So anyway.
No, but you're speaking already, so just go ahead.
Great. Okay, fantastic. Thank you very much, Jonathan, for this very interesting presentation and the research. I think briefly, I was born in Tanzania, and I do a lot of work in the Africa region. To put this in context, the issue, I think, is a combination of mindset and the connectivity, because infrastructure is, yes, there are issues, we have got political issues, but the raw material is there. It is a question of the people understanding that the raw material is there, and how do we do a transformational exercise where we are collaborating as opposed to just looking at our own personal interest. And I think so that is so fundamental with the whole movement globally of geopolitics, and also the movement when you look at the movement of the demographics globally. Africa is definitely the largest population growth and will be driving the economies of many nations. But the current model is where people have to physically come from their country across, either legally or illegally, to improve themselves, because their local audience or their local mindset is not permitting or not allowing disruption or engagement in a sense. And there are many things that you mentioned there that I don't want to hog the conversation. I've reached out to connect with both you and to Caroline, is to really, for us together, do our little piece in different ways and work, because I'm doing a lot of things around that combination of vocational space and university collaboration space.
Good.
Right. And we can bring a lot of skill sets using AI, internet through disruptive players where existing partners cannot do it because they are the old style. And we don't have to build a new infrastructure. We can sweat the existing infrastructure. You know, it is those small mindset changes and small pivoting of ideas is what is necessary.
I mean, I couldn't agree any less with you. I think the point of mindset change is really very critical. There could also be an argument that as L&D, could we also be leading that mindset shift as well too? I think that was very spot on with you. And I like the idea around sweating what we already have, right? Rather than even building a new infrastructure.
Exactly.
Couldn't agree less, yeah? And then the point on collaboration. I also think that that's also something we need to highlight a lot. And it's an ecosystem collaboration from not just for the government and just set of private institutions or private people as well too, right? But really across different subsets of the ecosystem, you know, whether that's also looks at, you know, civil organizations as well, because some issues we have also in Africa is really around our institutions as well too. So there's quite a lot of role that public institutions can play as well.
Exactly.
And if we have the civil organizations also on board in what we're trying to do, that also helps.
Yeah, exactly. And just to add here is one of the things that that I'm doing and working in this space is what you tend to find is apart from the collaborations is I'm sure you probably are noticing is Africa has got diaspora members in parts of the world. You know, we shouldn't, I say we because I consider myself, although I'm originally, my parents come from India, but I was born in Africa and I went to school and finished high school in Africa. So, you know, I see it from that perspective. And I was there in March and I'm doing a lot of work there. And how can we, as a population, those who have the opportunity, like you and me, who are in the continent and overseas, is there is definitely a movement now of leveraging diaspora funds to actually fund projects as opposed to going to institutions like World Bank, IFC, because let's face it, it's a long process and it is a switch on, switch out process. So if there is a political movement which does not like what you're trying to do, you know, you don't get the money. Okay. So there's an agenda where really it's matching the diaspora's funds, and the diaspora, typically the amount of money flow from diaspora into Africa is billions. I think so. There was a recent study and a research where even World Bank and people like that cannot track how much money is going, because you know it's sent through channels to the banking system. Others are going on holiday with cash in their hands, so that's not being tracked. So there are billions going, but the issue is that the nations, the countries, the national governments need, and industry need to give the confidence that if I'm coming to, say, to Kenya or Nigeria or Gambia, wherever, that I'm giving money, I would prepare to give money to my family. That's number one. Using, you know, the concept that it is the Maslow theory, you hierarchy, where you leverage helping your community, your family, but then any funds that is excess, you can put instead of putting in a bank, you can give it to a bank, and if it is politically stable and a banks in the country gives you a good rate of return, that money can be utilized for projects there rather than going for foreign aid. And now, for example, Tanzania and Zanzibar, what they've done is that's something happening there. I know in West Africa, it's happening in Ghana and Nigeria, with lots of people coming and doing a lot of movements of projects and putting funding from using diaspora networks to leverage, because, you know, they have the knowledge, they have the wherewithal, and they have the disruptive thinking.
Yeah. Yeah, that's a very good one. I think it speaks to innovative funding models for us in Africa. And that's an interesting research that I'm happy to, take on how diaspora funding can actually catalyze some of our L&D initiatives we do in Africa. That's a very interesting perspective I just got.
Yeah.
Thank you. Very helpful commentary.
Thank you.
Thank you, George, for sharing that. Very useful insights there. As an African, born, raised, living, working in Africa.
Yeah.
Some things irritate me about our continent. And I think we have a lot to learn from within and from outside as well. And I think our biggest pain is leadership. And I think that's where the real solution is, because 11 years have passed. I like what you said, Jonathan, about the midterm review, or at least an interim review, to see whether or not we are on track and what changes we need to make. My big question, and really to all of us, even as we have these conversations, is that yes, our conversations are intellectually stimulating and very interesting, to look at the research findings and all. But after 39 years, when 2063 rolls around, will we still be thinking and grappling with the same issues, and what needs to change for that turnaround to happen? Not to say that there's no progress, there is progress, there's steps being made, but how do we make them more coherently and also faster is what I just want to put out there. I don't have any answers, just part of the conversation.
Yeah.
So we have a number of comments that have come in. So we have, let me see, so that I don't leave anyone out. So we have Elizabeth, so right from the beginning. So we had Margaret saying, well done, blew me away. Wow. And then we have Elizabeth saying, very insightful session. Thank you to the team and to Jonathan for this. Dora Darkwa, also one of the speakers from the conference. Good to see you, Dora. You're saying, I think Africa should be intentional in implementing the recommendations. Exactly, yes. Those are my thoughts exactly as well, Dora. We should be intentional. Not only that, coordinated and also coherent as well. Daisy says, mindset is such a biggie. Yes, for our leaders, for our people. Yes. And I think there's also need to bridge the gaps, because for many of our older leaders, it's not that they don't want to, but maybe just having some guidance, and then the younger ones probably listening more as well and forging a strong partnership. And then Fidelia, thank you, Doctor, for that wonderful, insightful session. Thank you so much. But please, how can the ordinary MSME leverage on the opportunity of accessing any L&D initiative, especially in Nigeria, given that such opportunities are few? So that's a question that will come back to you, Jonathan, to answer. And then from Marisa, thank you so much for the presentation. As you said in essay, our national development plans are excellent. What is important, and it's Marisa, this is true for the whole of Africa, is how we implement. How do we work together as stakeholders and partner to implement? Another enabling factor will be to share best practice using technology to enable implementation of the initiatives. Totally agree with you that collaboration is key. Daisy says, this is such a huge gap, great plans, lackluster implementation, if any. I couldn't say it better. And then Dora adds 11 years into the implementation. What would be your assessment whether Africa is on track in achieving the goals set out in the document? Very interesting. Yeah. So yeah, what would your take be, everyone on the call? Because I know we have every region represented here. East Africa, West Africa, South Africa, and North Africa as well. Are we on track? What more needs to be done? Do you agree with some of the comments which have been made or not? Just share your answers in chat, or we can give one or two of us an opportunity on the mic. Just good to see you. Totally agree with you, George. Recently carried out an assignment in West Africa with a partner who was recommended by the client. Unfortunately, I sensed a bit of competition from the other partner, and I was wondering why they can't see the opportunity, absolutely, for working together more in future instead of competing. Totally agree with you there. And Daisy adds, and yet when we collaborate, we all win. We learn different ways of doing things and enhance enhance our individual growth when we do. Thank you all for your comments. We had a question there, and I think we can end with this one because it's almost time. Our sessions usually take an hour and a half. So we had a question. Let me just scroll back up to it. I think it was from, okay. I don't know if you remember it, Jonathan, as I try to find it and repeat it, the question that was shared.
Okay.
Yes,
So
this was
okay,
by Fidelia about MSMEs leveraging on the opportunities of accessing any L&D, especially in Nigeria, given that such opportunities are few. What's your take?
okay, so yes, I agree with you that opportunities are few, but there are still some opportunities that we could look at. So, for example, we still have a bit of some government initiatives that we do see, and government will be at two levels. At our federal government, there are quite a couple of things we do. So we have a body called SMEDAN. SMEDAN do have some training programs. They do offer capacity building programs where MSMEs can sort of partner with them on or become beneficiaries, right? Even at the various states, right? So there are a couple of those things that we do have. I also know that some corporate organizations do have some CSR initiatives where they try to work with MSMEs in building capacity, right, and offering learning and development potentials or opportunities. There's also the opportunity around leveraging online programs as well too, right? And also networking. I mean, a good program like this is also one as well. I mean, associations like the Learning and Development Network Africa, which is this platform, is also one that can sort of facilitate and bring small businesses as well together, right? There could be those opportunities, and even to speak to experts and hear expert views through programs like this, right? I also think as well too that I've seen situations where collaborations as well could also happen. So partnering as well too could also create more opportunities for these MSMEs.
Thank you. So I hope that answers your question. I don't see any other questions in chat. Any reactions or questions? Let's see.
I've got, I'm sure some of you are probably aware, in the disruptive market in education and training, the headquarters of MasterCard. MasterCard is giving a lot of money to startups and entrepreneurs, and you find a lot of them are, the youngsters are graduates from African universities, and some of them gone overseas, but they've come back to address those challenges, like the content of education taught in schools and universities and technical colleges are really, really not up to mark. So when you come out with the qualification, you are trying to find the key to which door because you're not up to mark. So there are people who are producing content for schools, and connecting and providing and supporting teaching and the national governments. I know some, particularly in Kenya and some other countries, where there are content developers who are producing content for schools because teachers don't have the time, they're not paid well, so they don't have the capacity to do it. So these guys do it, and then they create a company and they run that through, create an MVP, build a business, and then people like MasterCard, whose Africa headquarters is in Kigali, they basically are funding some of these very, very interesting initiatives. So I think so. Those kinds of things are very, very interesting of how to address this. And I think so. The connectivity between the employment, because let's face it, everybody who's going to college or school or whatever they're looking for, not all of us are going to be entrepreneurs. There's being entrepreneur is very difficult. It's not easy because people only see the end result when a very small percentage is being successful. But the key is that we need to create opportunity for these entrepreneurs to go ahead, but also for giving those youngsters who would have ideas Because how do you come up with the solution is addressing problems in your vicinity, right? Around you that you observe. Because you can bring theory to a class or to people, and if they don't see it, there's no context to understand it. It is just something they'll memorize and put in an exam. But if they've got an issue that they're facing, whether it's to do with food or agriculture or whatever, and then you bring together people from different talents to say, how would you solve this problem? Give them that facility and then talk to industry and say, this is what you need for your future. These people will come up with ideas of how to make things work. Because, as we know, we can't build a house from the roof to the foundation. You got to build it the other way around. So when you're thinking of big infrastructure projects, you need to think about what are the other elements and start doing the capacity training well ahead. Because as so many projects are come on the board, not only in Africa, I see this around the globe because I do work in other parts of the world as well, that they do a lot of planning, great documentation, but suddenly they wake up and say, oh, now where do I get the people to be able to execute this? And what happens is that they don't have the local people, from the country employed, and the money again gets thrown out to expatriates to do the job, which is crazy. So you then have political instability. So, you have these combination of issues. If they are not thought through and they're not connected with industry, what are the industrial problems? What are the industry issues? Where are the raw materials, which are the human beings? Whether you call AI, whatever that is, at the end of the day, human beings are the most, people who are come up with lots of ideas. Leveraging them, giving them the space and the capability and the support to come up with solutions.
Thank you. So, Jonathan, back to you to respond briefly to what George has said, and then to share your parting shot with us. I'm looking at the time, and it's time to bring this to a close, but thank you very much for that. Those contributions, George, definitely we have to start from the ground up, and we have to do it right. And we have to keep our eye on the prize, which is really building up our continent. Jonathan, what would you say in response, and what's your parting shot as well to the topic of the day? Thank you.
I couldn't be more grateful to George for his wonderful contributions and also the perspectives that he brought. So I don't think really it is a reaction, but really to commend and to thank him, because that was very valuable, all the things he had shared. And also just, I also like the point he made a lot around sweating what we already have and really looking inwards, the point on diaspora funding as well too. So I think all the things he said were very helpful, very insightful, and quite unique for us here in Africa. And then just in parting shot to say, look, we are 11 years into this. There's quite a lot of opportunities for us, but we must recognize those opportunities. I also think we should also engage on the document. So even if it's after this, that we're all happy to go back and look at these audacious documents, right? I think it could also create opportunities for us in-house here. But more importantly is that L&D is critical to achieving the AU 2063 agenda, and we need partnerships as well to be able to do that. So thank you, everyone. It was such a pleasure to have been given the opportunity to share my research.
Thank you.
Thank you, Jonathan.
Thank you very much, Jonathan. Definitely a lot to think about. I wonder how many of us had interacted with Agenda 2063 or even the document. And actually, Fidelis is asking a very pertinent question. How do we get the full research paper, Jonathan?
Okay, what I will do is I'll share both I'll share the documents as well too, and which also includes the AU's document as well with every other thing.
That's awesome. Yes, and then as we share our thank you note for attending the webinar, we shall send that out to all of you. Thank you very much. Great. So just looking at the comments, a few more streaming in. We have Yeah, so a few thank you messages. Robert Bell says, thank you for the great session. Diana, thank you for giving us this opportunity to learn from Jonathan and his work. Absolutely. Yeah, thank you very much. And yeah, so just a lot of thank yous as well. So just before we wrap up, we just have an announcement about our next webinar. But before we get into that, Margaret, why don't you say hello to us? Margaret Jackson is the founder of and the convener of the L&D Africa conference. And whenever she's in the session, we always like her to just say hello. She's the one who began it all, and always a pleasure to just engage with you, Margaret.
Always a pleasure, Caroline. And thank you very much, Jonathan. I've known Jonathan for some time now, and I'm happy he's sharing his wealth of knowledge. Jonathan, you wowed me. You blew me away. And me, I always say, yes, we have political instability in Africa, but as L&D professionals, we have to work around this. And we have to consider our diversity. We have to look at our gaps, and we have to look at the youth now, because we are a young continent. I loved the fact that you mentioned technology, financial, and entrepreneurial skills development. This is a challenge I'm throwing to all of us this year. Let's start, little steps will take us there. Let's partner, otherwise we will perish. Let's start working on technology. Let's start working on financial skills. Let's start working on entrepreneurial skills, leadership development. Let's stop complaining about what we do not have. Let's use what we have. And as we work with a positive mindset, we will make it. And the change starts with us as L&D professionals. Thank you very much, Jonathan. You've given us a lot at the Secretariat to think about. And I'm challenging each and every one of us. Take one. And next year, when we meet at the conference, let's share our success stories. What did you do with financial skills development? How many did you develop? How many people did you train? How many people's skills did you build? Was it the youth? Let's target the youth. Thank you very much. Carol, if you don't stop me, I'm passionate about working with the youth because we are a young continent. Yeah. Thank you very much to everybody who joined. And thank you, Jonathan.
Thank you, Ma. Thank you, Margaret.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Margaret, for that challenge. Indeed, what do you have in your hand? And what will you start with? Because it takes all of us to make the difference that we want to see. And it just starts where you are. With whatever resources you have, look for partners, but begin and let there be a difference by the end of the year. So our next webinar will be on the 21st of November, and we shall be having Sarah Yusuf, who wasn't able to join us at the conference. So Sarah Yusuf is the principal partner of Kaizen, the learning place, and she'll be sharing with us on the crucial role of collaboration and partnerships in achieving sustainable learning and development. So one of the things that amazed us during the conference is how interconnected all the presentations were. And that's also what we're seeing even as we are working on this webinar series. So stay tuned, we'll be sharing more information about this. Remember, every 2 weeks we shall be having a webinar. We'll take a short break for the Christmas holidays into the new year, and then we'll pick it up again right up to March. And then after that, we may taper off into monthly webinars, but you don't want to miss any of these conversations. I thank each and every last one of you for joining this webinar, for participating as well, and for sharing. And we shall do it as well on the 21st of November. Thank you, everyone. And wishing you a wonderful evening and a wonderful weekend ahead, even as you mull over what Jonathan has shared with us, because all of us are Africans and mindset was talked about quite a lot in our session. What's your mindset? Is it a problem-based mindset or is it a solution-based mindset? Let's be part of the new Africa and let's build wherever we are. So thanks, everybody. Wishing you a wonderful evening, and we'll see you at the next one. Bye-bye.
Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. It was impactful. Appreciate.
Thanks for the feedback. Bye-bye.